They thought time was on their side. That assumption gave them comfort. It let them relax. It allowed them to believe whatever advantage they had would hold simply because nothing dramatic was happening yet. People who rely on time usually do so because they don't understand process. They think delay means weakness. Silence means uncertainty. Absence of noise means absence of intent. That was their first mistake. You weren't waiting. You were layering. You weren't slowing down. You were compressing. While they measured progress by visible movement, you were removing variables internally. They assumed you were reacting to circumstances. In reality, you were restructuring the conditions those circumstances depended on. They mistook your restraint for hesitation, your patience for indecision, your refusal to escalate for lack of capability. That misread bought you space, and space is the most underestimated asset there is. People rush when they think momentum is external. You didn't. You understood that real leverage accumulates when you stop leaking energy into unnecessary response. Every time they tried to shape movement, you stayed exact. Every time they expected urgency, you stayed timed. You didn't explain delays because there were none. You didn't defend silence because it wasn't absence, it was containment. While they were spending time reinforcing positions, you were simplifying dependencies. While they competed for relevance, you were stabilizing your center. That's why they couldn't see what you were building. They were looking for structure in the wrong layer. They expected scaffolding, noise, signaling. What you were building didn't announce itself because it didn't need reinforcement. It was internal coherence. And coherence compounds quietly. Early on, they dismissed outcomes that favored you as coincidence. Timing, luck, temporary alignment. Those explanations comfort people who don't want to revise their perception. But repetition erodes comfort. When the same result appears across different contexts, coincidence stops being believable. That's when unease sets in. They start replaying interactions they ignored, decisions they thought were minor, moments where you opted out instead of engaging. In hindsight, those moments form a pattern that was invisible at the time. You weren't avoiding conflict. You were simplifying resistance. You weren't delaying action. You were sequencing it. You understood something they didn't. Time doesn't reward motion. It rewards alignment. Motion without alignment decays. Alignment without motion compounds. They were spending time. You were investing it. That difference doesn't show immediately. It shows when conditions intensify and only one structure holds. As they escalated to feel in control, you simplified to remain precise. As they accelerated, you reduced. As they tried to shape outcomes, you made outcomes inevitable. That's why time betrayed them. Not because you outpaced them, but because you weren't racing at all. You were building something that didn't depend on speed. And structures that don't depend on speed can't be overtaken. They can only be noticed once they're finished. Once that realization began to surface, it didn't arrive cleanly. It arrived with denial. People don't like discovering that while they were waiting for something obvious to happen, something lasting was already taking shape. They told themselves stories to soften the implication. You'll stall. You'll plateau. You'll eventually need to explain yourself. They needed you to re-enter the same rhythm they were operating on because it would confirm their original assumption. You didn't. You stayed exact, not rigid. Exact. Your decisions didn't multiply. They narrowed. Your movements didn't increase. They became final. That's when they sensed their timeline was misaligned. Time only feels like an advantage when both sides are leaking energy at the same rate. You weren't leaking anything. You weren't reacting to pressure. You weren't adjusting to their tempo. You were moving according to an internal sequence that didn't speed up under observation. And that unsettled them. Because observation is usually leverage. Attention creates distortion. Performance adapts to being watched. You didn't adapt. You didn't speed up. You didn't perform differently. The moment they realized that, they lost their frame of reference. They could no longer tell whether waiting benefited them or helped you. That uncertainty drained confidence. People rely on timelines because timelines make outcomes feel predictable. You removed predictability by refusing to participate in urgency. You didn't resist deadlines. You set them aside. You didn't challenge pressure. You made it irrelevant. While they kept checking clocks, you kept eliminating dependencies. Every dependency removed was one less lever they could reach for later. They didn't see that happening because dependency removal doesn't create spectacle. It creates quiet. And quiet is misread as emptiness by people who only recognize noise. This is where the shift accelerated. Not outwardly, but internally. You stopped considering options that didn't align. You stopped engaging in conversations that diluted clarity. You stopped feeding dynamics that required explanation. That narrowing looked like retreat from the outside. In reality, it was consolidation. You weren't shrinking, you were concentrating. And concentration changes density. Dense structures don't need volume to hold weight. They don't require speed to maintain position. They persist. As time passed, small indicators started to appear that they couldn't dismiss anymore. Situations that should have influenced you didn't. Conflicts that should have drawn you in resolved without your involvement. Outcomes that should have required negotiation happened anyway. Each instance felt minor on its own. Together, they formed a pattern that weakened their trust in time as an ally. Time wasn't on anyone's side. It was revealing who had been building something stable all along. That pattern is what finally shifted their belief in waiting as a strategy. Because time doesn't reward intent. It rewards structure. And structure only forms when excess is removed. They began to notice how often they had relied on momentum to mask instability. How frequently they assumed speed meant control. How deeply they trusted timelines to do work they never finished internally. In contrast, what you were building required no deadline to validate it. It didn't accelerate under pressure. It didn't weaken under delay. It held its shape regardless of external pace. That's when the realization settled fully. You weren't positioning for advantage later. You were eliminating fragility in the present. And fragility is the only thing time actually exposes. As conditions shifted and demands increased, the difference became undeniable. Their structures demanded constant attention to remain upright. Yours required none. You didn't need to monitor outcomes because you weren't compensating for weakness. You didn't need to adjust strategy because there was nothing unstable to protect. What you built was not visible because it wasn't performative. It was foundational. And foundations don't announce themselves. They reveal themselves when other supports no longer hold. That is the moment they finally understood why waiting didn't help them. Time didn't slow you down. It filtered distractions away. Every delay removed another distraction. Every pause stripped away another unnecessary attachment. You weren't preparing for a reveal. You were preparing for durability. When they eventually looked up and saw what had formed, it wasn't dramatic. It was complete. No loose ends. No dependence on reaction. No need for explanation. They didn't miss the moment because it passed quickly. They missed it because it never needed to arrive. What you were building existed long before they had the range to see it. And by the time they understood, time was no longer a factor that mattered. The structure was already in place. What followed wasn't alarm, it was recalibration. Alarm happens when people think something can still be redirected. This couldn't. They didn't rush to respond because there was nothing obvious to respond to. No announcement, no declaration, no visible move to counter. Just a quiet recognition that whatever they thought they were waiting out had already settled into place. That's the moment timelines lose relevance. People stop asking how long they have and start asking what still works. They test familiar levers out of habit, pressure, urgency, incentives, social positioning. None of it connects. Not because you resist it, but because what you built doesn't connect to those inputs anymore. You're not running on momentum. You're not fueled by reaction. You're not sustained by approval. So nothing external accelerates or unsettles you. This is when behavior around you changes without conversation. People become careful, not cautious, deliberate, not defensive. They don't challenge you directly, because challenges assume friction. You simplified everything down to what actually matters. They sense that effort spent trying to influence you will be wasted, and wasted effort is something systems instinctively avoid. That's why you're no longer pulled into unnecessary discussions, why assumptions stop forming around your silence, why your absence no longer creates opportunity for others to fill space. What you built holds even when you're not present. That's the part they didn't anticipate. They thought time would expose a gap. Instead, time revealed continuity. You weren't holding something together through effort. You were standing on something that didn't require maintenance. And structures like that don't invite interference. They redefine the environment simply by existing within it. That's why people stop circling and start adjusting. They don't need confirmation. The lack of effect is confirmation enough. This is where the understanding becomes settled. Not loud, not celebrated, settled. They realize that waiting never helped them because you were never racing. You weren't building toward a moment. You were building away from dependency, away from fragility, away from anything that could be rushed, influenced, or interrupted. Time didn't belong to them because time wasn't part of your process. You weren't counting on it. You weren't negotiating with it. You were using it to strip away what didn't hold. And what remains after that kind of stripping doesn't need explanation. It doesn't need to be defended. It doesn't need to be revealed. It's already integrated. They now understand why they couldn't see what you were building, because they were looking for movement instead of stability, for signals instead of structure, for outcomes instead of foundations. You didn't deceive them. You didn't hide. You simply refused to perform progress for people who mistake noise for meaning. And once that refusal is complete, The dynamic concludes. There is no counterplay, no late realization that changes the outcome, just acceptance that whatever they thought time would give them, it already gave you something else. Durability. And durability doesn't arrive suddenly. It's there long before anyone notices. They thought time was on their side. They didn't see what you were building, because what you built didn't need their attention to exist. And by the time they understood, nothing about it required their understanding anymore. You didn't outweight them. You outlasted the need to be measured at all. What you built didn't require recognition, because it was never dependent on reaction. That's why nothing shifted when attention arrived late. Nothing accelerated either. The structure was already self-sustaining. People sense that now. They don't approach you with timelines. They don't test patience. They don't assume influence exists where it once did. Not because you hardened, because you completed. Completed, removing what could be rushed. Completed, eliminating what required explanation. Completed, participating in dynamics that only function through pressure. Time didn't reveal you. It revealed who was relying on it. And once that distinction became clear, the entire conversation ended on its own. No confrontation, no acknowledgement, just a quiet recalibration of behavior around something that doesn't move. That's why nothing more needs to happen. You're not waiting for outcomes. You're standing on them. And structures like that don't announce completion. They simply remain. And that continuity is the last thing they recognize, often without being able to explain it. Not excitement, not anxiety, continuity. The sense that whatever phase they thought this was has already passed, and whatever remains is not shifting for their benefit or approval. You are no longer interpreted as a process. You are treated as a condition. Conditions don't negotiate, they are accounted for. People don't try to speed them up or slow them down. They adjust behavior and move accordingly. That's why the dynamic doesn't resurface. No second guessing, no late challenges, no renewed attempts to frame you. The moment they understand what you were building, they also understand there is nothing left to interrupt, nothing to accelerate, nothing to redirect. You didn't finish loudly, because what you completed doesn't require witnesses. You didn't claim anything because claiming invites contest. You removed the basis for contest by eliminating dependence altogether. And when dependence is gone, time loses relevance. There is no waiting for the right moment. No anticipation of a reveal. No next move expected. The structure is already doing its work simply by existing. That's why the realization settles quietly and stays settled. Not as admiration, not as acknowledgement, as orientation. People move differently because they know what doesn't work here. They preserve effort. They choose precision. They don't mistake motion for influence anymore. And you remain exactly where you are. Not advancing, not retreating. Just present in a way that cannot be hurried, influenced, or misread again. They thought time was on their side because they believed time creates advantage. What you built shows something else. Advantage fades. Noise decays. Pressure runs out. Structure remains. And once that becomes clear, there is nothing left to add. The environment has already adjusted. The conclusion has already formed, and it doesn't need another word. And that is the last layer settling into place. Not realization, not admiration, acceptance. The kind that doesn't announce itself because it doesn't need reinforcement. People stop asking questions not because answers were given, but because questions no longer function. They recognize quietly and instinctively that whatever you built does not respond to timing, influence, or outside direction. It doesn't accelerate when watched. It doesn't weaken when ignored. It holds the same shape regardless of attention. That's when the behavior around you finds balance. No more probing, no more speculative narratives, no more assumptions that you are still in motion towards something they can influence. You are no longer treated as a possibility. You are treated as a constant. And constants don't invite engagement. They invite alignment. People plan differently. They speak more carefully. They stop trying to insert urgency where it won't land. They stop mistaking effort for influence, not because you taught them a lesson, but because reality did the teaching for you. This is why nothing dramatic follows. No confrontation, no late apology, no moment of recognition that changes your path. Your path was never waiting on recognition. You didn't build toward a reveal. You built away from dependence, away from fragility, away from anything that could be rushed, delayed, or interrupted. Time didn't expose your work. It exposed who was relying on time instead of structure. And once that distinction becomes clear, the dynamic concludes without negotiation. You don't step forward to claim what was built. You don't explain what it cost. You don't defend why it holds. You simply remain where you are, and the environment adjusts around that fact. That is the settled state. Not dominance through force, not influence through persuasion, stability through completion. They thought time was on their side because they believed advantage grows by waiting. What you built shows something else entirely. Advantage fades, noise decays, strain runs out. Structure remains. And when structure remains, there is nothing left to challenge, and nothing left to add. The conclusion doesn't echo. It settles. And it stays settled. Even language begins to thin, because what remains is no longer a message. It's a condition, the kind that doesn't need reinforcement, explanation, or memory to persist. People don't carry a story about you forward. They carry an adjustment. They don't recall what you said or when you moved. They remember what stopped working in your presence. That memory shapes behavior more reliably than any warning ever could. From this point on, the pattern doesn't return in the same way. No return to casual dismissal. No reopening of dynamics that already proved ineffective. Once structure replaces speculation, the system doesn't revert. It preserves what works and releases what doesn't. That's what happened here. You didn't outlast them through time. You stepped beyond the need for time to validate anything at all. What you built doesn't wait for recognition because it doesn't require recognition to function. It doesn't need momentum because it isn't powered by reaction. It doesn't need protection because it isn't exposed. And that is why this conclusion doesn't feel like an ending. It feels like a settling, a quiet confirmation that nothing else is required. No next move, no escalation, no reveal. The environment already recalibrated, the assumptions already dissolved, the understanding already embedded itself into behavior. You remain not as something to be interpreted, but as a constant to be accounted for. Hello, my dear masterminds. They've built entire systems to explain everything. Science for the stars, numbers for the markets, archives for every name they thought mattered. But when it comes to you, all those systems fail. You don't fit the categories. You don't bend to equations. You don't shrink into their boxes. You stand as the anomaly they whisper about but can't decode. And that unsettles them. Because power they can label, they can oppose. But you exist beyond language, beyond measure. Every time they try to define you, the definition collapses. Every time they think they've mapped you, the map glows in their hands. That's why their silence feels so heavy when you walk in. They know they're staring at something unexplainable. You're not a glitch in their design. You're proof their design was never complete. They gathered experts for you, analysts with charts, scholars with citations, cynics with smirks. They brought priests for meaning, doctors for labels, mystics for symbols, engineers for structure. And yet when you entered, the instruments went quiet. Their metrics froze, their models buckled, their language stumbled over its own certainty. They tried 3 tricks: to pathologize you, to moralize you, to trivialize you. None held. Because you don't behave like a case. You don't sit still like a lesson. You arrive like an event. Their questions didn't measure you, they revealed them. Every test returned the same verdict: undefined. That word unsettles those who sell answers for a living, so they gripped harder. Spreadsheets, scriptures, surveillance, searching for a handle. All they found was their reflection, bending under a presence that refused to be owned. Clocks seemed slower, rooms heavier. Meanings rearranged themselves. And for the first time, the question changed from "who are you?" to "what are we?" if we have no box for this. You didn't confuse them. You completed the part of the world their language forgot. Understand this. Your existence alone is confrontation. You don't need to argue. You don't need to prove. You don't need to demand. The fact that you breathe, that you move, that you stand in their sight is enough to unravel the illusions they cling to. Because you're not supposed to be here. Not by their logic, not by their design. They calculated the outcomes, wrote the scripts, planned the futures, and you weren't in them. Yet here you are. That's why they freeze, why their whispers stumble, why their explanations collapse into fragments. You carry the kind of presence that makes even silence feel like thunder. They can't explain why you exist. But existence doesn't ask for explanation. It demands recognition. And every time they try to look past you, they fail. Because you are the undeniable fact their systems can't erase. Normally, silence is their tool. They use it to dismiss, to ignore, to pretend someone doesn't matter. But when it comes to you, silence turns against them. It doesn't erase you. It amplifies you. The longer they avoid saying your name, the louder your presence becomes. The room bends around your existence, forcing them to acknowledge what they hope to bury. And that's why they're restless. They know words can't diminish you, and silence only crowns you. Every glance they steal, every pause they hold too long, becomes confession. They don't understand why you're here, why you don't fade, why you don't fit. Their narratives. But confusion doesn't erase truth. And the truth is this: you exist, undeniable, unexplainable, and their silence, instead of control, becomes the stage where your anomaly reigns. You're not just present in the room, you follow them when you leave. They replay your words, your stillness, your very existence, trying to stitch it into logic, and failing every time. That failure unsettles them. Because humans crave explanation. They sleep better when the world makes sense. But you disturb that sleep. You are the unsolved equation, the glitch in the system, the face that doesn't fit the pattern. And instead of fading, the mystery grows heavier. Every attempt to categorize you only proves how far outside the frame you stand. That's why even those who claim not to believe in anomalies still whisper about you. Their doubt is just another form of fascination. You're the story they can't stop retelling, the mystery they can't bury, the anomaly they can't forget. They built their lives on structure, rules, ranks, hierarchies, neat little chains of command. And for everyone else, it works. Order keeps them small, predictable, contained. But when you appear, the order bends. The highest look uneasy, the loudest go quiet, the proudest stumble over their own steps. Not because you broke the rules, but because your presence rewrites them. Their systems can handle rebels, can silence challengers, but they can't handle someone who doesn't even fit the definitions of those roles. You're not inside their order, and you're not outside it. You are beyond it. And that unsettles them most. They don't know whether to resist you, follow you, or fall silent. All they know is this: their precious order bends every time you arrive. They try to avoid it. They circle around it with words like strange, different, unusual. But none of those touch the truth. Because deep down, they know those are masks for a word they're afraid to speak: extraordinary. They fear to name it because naming it gives it weight, makes it real, makes it undeniable. And once they admit it, they lose control of the story. So they whisper in fragments, trade half sentences, hoping the mystery of you fades if they don't look too long. But mystery doesn't fade when ignored, it grows. And with every moment they refuse to speak it, the silence screams louder. They can't explain you, can't define you, can't erase you. And the more they resist naming what you are, the more the world itself begins to name you. They pride themselves on control, on building systems that account for every possibility, every outlier, every anomaly. But when your name enters, the system glitches. Their patterns break, their certainty stumbles, their rules collapse under the weight of something they never prepared for. You are the error code they can't debug, the exception their algorithms can't handle. And that drives them restless, because systems give them power, and you are proof their power has limits. The harder they try to reset, the more obvious the glitch becomes. The more they attempt to erase it, the more permanent you appear. That's why they whisper, why they fidget, why they lose sleep. Because if their systems can't explain you, then maybe they were never in control to begin with. And you're the living reminder of that truth. They've built careers on denial, entire reputations on dismissing what doesn't fit their version of reality. For everyone else, it works. But when it comes to you, denial collapses. They can look away, but the air shifts. They can scoff, but their voices crack. They can laugh, but the sound fades too quickly. Because your existence is heavier than their excuses. You're not theory, you're proof. Living, undeniable, unavoidable proof that their limits aren't final. Their rules aren't absolute. Their world isn't complete. And proof unsettles them more than mystery, because mystery leaves room for doubt, but proof eliminates it. You don't ask them to believe, you force them to know. And knowing reshapes everything. That's why they struggle, why their pride buckles, why their silence grows longer. You are the fact they cannot bury. Rules are comforting. They tell people what to expect, where to stand, how far they can go. And for most, the rules hold steady. But then there's you, the exception. The one presence the rules can't predict, can't contain, can't measure. Exceptions don't just slip through cracks. They break the frame, and that's what you are to them. A living reminder that their order isn't unshakable. They wanted to treat you like a mistake, a glitch, a temporary anomaly. But the longer you stand, the clearer it becomes. You aren't the exception that proves the rule. You're the exception that ends it. Their structure fractures because of you. Their certainty falters in your shadow. And every time they see you, they're reminded that no system is complete if it can't explain why you exist. They call in thinkers, philosophers, strategists, each one convinced they'll be the one to define you. But every attempt collapses into contradiction. You are strength without arrogance, silence without weakness, presence without explanation. You exist in opposites that refuse to cancel out, and paradox unsettles them because it proves their logic isn't law. They want things to be neat, black or white, possible or impossible, weak or powerful. Yet you stand in the center, embodying both and neither, shattering the categories they depend on. That's why they can't explain why you exist, because your very existence reveals the limits of explanation itself. And the longer they stare, the more they realize you aren't a puzzle to be solved. You are the proof that their puzzles were never complete to begin with. Even when you're gone, you stay. Your presence lingers like a shadow etched into their memory, echoing in their thoughts. They replay the moments, searching for explanations, trying to file you under something ordinary. But the harder they try, the stronger the shadow becomes, because you aren't an event they can move past. You are a reality they must carry. You remind them their certainty is fragile, their structures are incomplete, their control is illusion. That's why they lower their voices when your name surfaces, why their conversations falter. When you're mentioned, they can't outrun the reminder. Your existence follows them into silence, into sleep, into every room where they thought they ruled. You are the shadow that never fades, the presence that forces them to admit something greater than their order walks among them. For centuries, they've written history to their liking, deciding who mattered, who vanished, who was remembered. But when it comes to you, the ink refuses their hand. Your truth doesn't bend to revision. They can't rewrite you, can't erase you, can't edit your existence into something smaller, and that is what unsettles them most. Because control was never about strength, it was about narrative. As long as they owned the story, they owned the world. But you are the story they can't control. Every attempt to distort you only exposes their weakness. Every denial only amplifies your presence. They can't change the fact that you stand where no one predicted, carrying a truth larger than their scripts. You aren't written by them, you're written against them. And the script that carries your name is ink they'll never hold. Patterns are their safety net. They study behaviors, chart outcomes, predict every move before it happens. And for most, the patterns never fail. But you are the disruption they can't chart. Your steps don't repeat. Your choices don't fit equations. Your aura bends every forecast. They call it chaos because they can't categorize it. But it isn't chaos, it's freedom. Freedom from their grids, their maps, their expectations. And freedom unsettles those who worship order. Every time you appear, their patterns collapse. The graphs they trusted lose shape. The outcomes they relied on dissolve into uncertainty. And in that uncertainty, they glimpse the truth. Their control was always an illusion. Because the moment someone exists outside the pattern is broken forever. You are that presence. You are that break. And they can't explain how or why you exist. Containment is their specialty. They build walls, forge rules, craft narratives, all designed to keep power within their grasp. But when it comes to you, nothing holds. Walls fracture. Rules fail. Narratives collapse. You slip through every barrier like they were never there. And the more they try to box you in, the more obvious it becomes. You were never meant to be contained. That's why they can't explain you. Because to explain is to define, and to define is to limit, and you defy all limits. You exist like water, like radiance, like storm, untouchable, unstoppable, reshaping everything you touch. They want to believe control still belongs to them, but deep down they know. Their systems are too small, their cages too weak, their grasp too fragile. You are proof that no container is large enough to hold what you are. When they look at you, they don't just see an anomaly, they see themselves unraveling, because your existence reflects their limits back at them. All the certainty they carried, all the pride they flaunted, all the control they believed in, it collapses in the mirror of your presence. They avoid your gaze because it strips them bare. It reminds them they are small, ordinary, predictable, while you stand as the exception they can't decode. That's why their silence around you is heavy. It isn't dismissal, it's defense. They're shielding themselves from the reflection you force. But mirrors don't lie, and they can't run from the truth forever. You are the evidence that their power has edges, their logic has cracks, and their certainty has an end. The mirror doesn't flatter them, it exposes them, and you are that mirror. They thrive on answers. It's how they control, how they impress, how they silence doubt. For every challenge, they've got a theory. For every mystery, they've got a story. But when it comes to you, their answers collapse. No title fits. No theory explains. No story contains. And that absence gnaws at them because unanswered questions spread like cracks through stone. The more they try to pin you down, the wider the cracks grow until even their own certainty begins to betray them. You are the question that can't be solved, the riddle without resolution, the anomaly that defies their entire vocabulary. And what unsettles them most isn't just that they can't explain you, it's that deep down, they know they were never meant to. You're not here to be understood. You're here to be undeniable. Some forces work quietly, invisible but undeniable. Gravity doesn't shout, doesn't chase, doesn't ask, it pulls. And that's what your existence has become for them. No matter how much they resist, no matter how far they try to distance themselves, they feel the tug. Their thoughts drift back to you. Their conversations circle your name. Their silence bends toward your presence. They don't want to admit it, but you've become their center of orbit. And gravity doesn't need explanation. It simply works. That's why their denial feels so hollow, their pride so fragile. They can't escape what draws them back every time. You are the weight they can't defy, the pull they can't outrun, the center they can't erase. They think silence is their tool, but in your case it becomes your shield. Every time they try to study you, their words collapse into hesitation. Every time they attempt to expose you, the room folds into quiet, making you untouchable. Silence doesn't strip you. It surrounds you, guarding what they'll never decode. And that's what unsettles them most. They can't even act without their tools breaking. Their gossip fades in their throats. Their analysis turns into stammering. Their accusations dissolve into empty stares. You move untouched, wrapped in the same silence they once believed was theirs to command. But this silence doesn't weaken you. It crowns you. It turns every failed attempt to define you into proof that you exist on a level above their reach. They can't explain it, but they can't deny it. Silence protects what they'll never own. Stories are their tool. They twist narratives, rewrite events, shape perception. For most people, it works. History bends to their script. But you refuse their pen. Every attempt to frame you turns against them. If they call you weak, your resilience shines brighter. If they call you lost, your presence proves direction. If they call you broken, your silence reveals strength. The story always slips out of their hands and writes itself in your favor. That's why they can't stand you. You're not just outside their systems. You're outside their stories. They can't reduce you to a character, can't trap you in a plot. Instead, you've become the parable they can't control, the legend that spreads without their permission. And the sharpest truth? Every word they speak about you, whether praise or denial, only builds your myth higher. They refuse to give you titles, thinking silence will strip you of weight. But silence is never empty. It speaks louder than words. Every pause when you walk in, every hesitation when your name arises, every conversation that falters mid-sentence becomes its own form of acknowledgement. They don't call you powerful, but the silence crowns you as such. They don't admit you matter, but the quiet declares it. And that is what unsettles them most. Their refusal becomes your recognition, because silence doesn't hide truths. It amplifies them. In their desperate attempt not to name you, they have named you something greater than language can hold. You are not defined by their words. You are defined by the silence that bends to you. And silence does not kneel for the ordinary. They hope time will erase you, that the world will forget, that your presence will fade like so many others. But truth doesn't fade, it lingers, and you are truth embodied. Long after their voices crack, long after their systems crumble, long after their names dissolve into dust, yours will still echo, because truth doesn't need permission to survive. It weaves itself into memory, carves itself into silence, plants itself in places no hand can uproot. That's why they can't explain you. Because explanations fade, but truth doesn't. They're used to controlling legacies, rewriting histories, deciding who is remembered. But when it comes to you, their power is irrelevant. You are not a chapter in their story. You are the story that swallows theirs whole. And long after they're gone, your truth will still stand, untouched, undeniable. They've mastered the art of dimming others, mocking until confidence cracks, ignoring until presence fades, controlling until light dims. But your light doesn't answer to them. It glows without fuel, shines without permission, grows without limit. Every attempt to smother you only makes the glow stronger. They cover their eyes, but the brilliance leaks through. They turn away, but the reflection follows them. That's the weight you bring. Not rage, not noise, but illumination they can't shut off. And light, once revealed, doesn't shrink back into darkness. You are the reminder that their shadows were never eternal, that their control was never absolute. They can't explain why you shine, can't measure it, can't contain it. All they know is that your light exists, and existence itself has already ended their illusion. They built entire lives around certainty, believing they knew how power worked, how people rose, how legends were written. But your existence ruined their blueprint. You are the proof they never wanted, the living contradiction of everything they preached. You shouldn't be here, yet here you stand. You shouldn't hold weight, yet the room bends to you. You shouldn't exist outside their systems, yet you thrive beyond them. And that unsettles them deeper than resistance ever could. Because once proof appears, denial becomes impossible. They can't argue you away, can't silence you, can't bury you. Your existence is evidence that their order was never complete, that their knowledge was never absolute. You are the unfinished page they can't fill, the answer key they can't write. They can't explain you, and that's exactly why you're undeniable. In the end, their systems collapse, their stories fade, their explanations rot. But you remain, the presence they couldn't define, the force they couldn't cage, the truth they couldn't bury, and that permanence is what crowns you. Legends aren't built on clarity, they're built on mystery, on the weight of the unexplainable. You are that mystery. You are that weight. Every room you enter proves it. Every silence you bend confirms it. Every attempt to erase you only writes you deeper into eternity. They can't explain why you exist, and they never will, because your existence was never meant to be explained. It was meant to be undeniable. And now, whether they whisper it in caution, or carry it in silence, or shout it in awe, the truth is sealed. You are the legend they can't escape. Hello, my dear masterminds. They thought you were finished, wrapped up, cornered, decisively turned. They whispered to each other like it was done, like the story had already closed on you, like you were just a footnote in a chapter they wrote too early. They looked at your silence and mistook it for defeat. But silence is never weakness. Silence is never surrender. Silence is what happens when a storm gathers its power before it breaks. You were not out of moves. You were out of patience. You were done explaining yourself to people still busy underestimating you. They thought you were quiet because you were empty. But that silence, that was strategy. That was composure. That was mastery. A king does not announce every move. A legend does not broadcast every calculation. A rising force does not need applause to exist. You were silent because you were already past the point of needing validation. You were silent because you knew the truth. A lion does not roar while stalking the wind. You planned in silence. You grew in silence. You healed in silence. You evolved in silence. And in silence, you won. They kept checking for signs that you were collapsing, waiting for any hint of weakness, hoping for proof that they were right about you. But the truth was harsher than they expected. There was nothing to see because everything was happening above their understanding. You were not losing. You were leveling. You were not stuck. You were becoming. And now they stand there, confused, shocked, nervous, because it hits them. The silence meant a decisive turn. The silence meant you are built different. The silence meant something they never anticipated. You were already beyond the finish line, while they were still celebrating the starting shot. Now they scramble, digging for explanations, ignoring every warning sign they once laughed at. They realize the shift was not when you spoke. The shift was when you stopped. Because the quiet ones, the ones who say nothing, they are the ones who already see everything. You did not need to clap back. You did not need to argue. You did not need to prove anything. You let time do the talking, and time just exposed the truth. Every doubt they projected faded. Every bet against you faded. Every whisper they spread turned into their own echo. You did not need to win loudly. You just needed to win undeniably. And now here they are, looking at you like they misread every chapter. Because they did. They read your silence as weakness, not knowing it was the final move in a scenario they never learned to play. They do not say it out loud, but you can feel it in the way they look at you now. That confusion, that unease, that sudden awareness that they miscalculated the entire time. They thought silence meant you were shrinking. They did not realize it meant you were sharpening. Silence is where the real ones rebuild, where the real ones reset, where the real ones reload. While they were busy writing you off, you were busy rewriting your entire path. And now they are replaying every moment where they thought they had the early advantage. Every moment they thought you were stuck. Every moment they convinced themselves they broke you. It hits them in waves. They did not corner you. They exposed themselves. They did not outsmart you. They revealed their assumptions. They did not defeat you. They awakened you. Because when someone like you goes silent, it means the internal shift already happened. The kind of shift that cannot be reversed. The kind of shift that unsettles people who never expected you to rise again. They were not prepared for the version of you that came out of the quiet. This version is not waiting for approval. This version does not hesitate. This version does not need to be understood. This version is surgical, calculated, certain. They thought they knew you, based on who you were before the silence. But silence changes people. Silence rewires the spirit. Silence strips away illusions. Silence rebuilds power. And the moment you walked out of that quiet, everything about your energy shifted. They cannot explain it. They cannot articulate it. But they feel it. A tension in the air when you enter the room. A pressure behind their ribs when they think of you. A sudden caution in their voice when your name comes up. They do not know what you are capable of now, and that unsettles them. Because people do not fear noise. People fear unpredictability. The unknown, the quiet force that watches, learns, adapts, and moves. When the timing is perfect, and that is exactly what you became. A force they never prepared for. A presence they never saw coming. A reminder that not every victory is played out loud. Some victories are earned in the shadows, long before the world notices. And now, they are noticing. Too late. They are trying to piece together how you flipped the entire script without giving a single warning. They want to know when you got this strong, when you got this clear, when you became unstoppable. But the truth is simple. You were already winning in silence, while they were celebrating your downfall out loud. They mistook the pause for an ending. They mistook the stillness for surrender. They mistook your silence for defeat. They were wrong. Silence was not the end. It was the evolution. They keep replaying it in their heads. That moment when everything shifted and they could not even catch it happening. One day you were silent. The next day your presence felt heavier, sharper, more focused. They did not see the internal upgrades. They did not witness the late-night battles you fought alone. They did not stand in the quiet with you while you rebuilt your spirit piece by piece. But now they are dealing with the version of you that rose out of all that. And it is a version they are not equipped to handle. They thought you were predictable. They thought you were easy to read. They thought they had you mapped, labeled, placed neatly into their little narrative. But silence makes people realize how little they truly understood. Your silence rewrote the entire blueprint they had of you. It forced them to acknowledge what they should have recognized from the start. A quiet person who knows their own power. A quiet person who stopped explaining themselves. A quiet person who outgrew the need to prove anything. They do not fear your voice. They fear your restraint. They fear your calm. They fear the way you can sit still while chaos erupts around you, because your power is not reaction, it is awareness. You see more in silence than they ever see in noise. And that is what disarmed them. They were loud. You were focused. They were frantic. You were grounded. They were celebrating too early. You were preparing for the long path. They thought the silence meant you had nothing left. But the truth, you were watching patterns form. You were catching lies in their tone. You were studying intentions hidden between their words. You were observing the moves they did not realize they were making. And every time they underestimated you, they handed you another piece of the puzzle. And now the picture is clear. So clear that your silence alone feels like authority. It feels like you know something they do not. It feels like you are 5 steps ahead, even when you have not said a word. And they dislike that. They dislike that they cannot read you anymore. They dislike that their old tricks do not work. They dislike that they do not know which version of you they are dealing with now. But the truth is simple. They are dealing with the version of you that stopped needing validation. The version that does not fold under pressure. The version that is not moved by their opinions. The version that has nothing to prove, yet proves everything by existing. They are finally realizing the most powerful advantage you ever had was not strength or anger or boldness. It was silence. Silence that held lessons. Silence that held strategy. Silence that held transformation. Silence that held a future they never imagined you would reach. And now that you have stepped back into the world, calm and steady, with that quiet confidence in your chest, they are scrambling to understand how they lost control of the story. They do not get it yet, but they are starting to. You did not win because you pushed louder. You won because you moved smarter. You won because you evolved when they expected you to crack. You won because your silence was not empty. It was the birthplace of your next victory. They still do not understand what really happened. They think the shift was sudden, but it was not sudden at all. It was earned. It was built. It was engineered quietly, slowly, intentionally. While they were busy trying to measure your worth by the noise you did not make, you were building leverage they could not see. You were collecting truths they overlooked. You were mastering patience they did not respect. And every time they convinced themselves you were done, you were actually sharpening a part of yourself they could never keep up with. That is why your silence unsettled them so deeply. Because silence reveals absence and presence at the same time. Absence of reaction, presence of awareness, absence of weakness, presence of strength, absence of fear, presence of focus. They do not fear losing control of you. They fear losing control of the illusion they built around you. Because that illusion made their lives easier. That illusion made them comfortable. That illusion made them feel superior. But now they are forced to accept that the version of you they crafted in their heads was not real. The version of you they underestimated was not real. The version of you they tried to manipulate was not real. The real you was growing in the quiet, and that is what unsettles them. Because real power grows where nobody is watching. Real transformation does not need applause. Real evolution does not ask for permission. They thought you were inactive, but you were incubating. They thought you were isolated, but you were elevating. They thought you had no options, but you were creating ones they could not imagine. And now reality is hitting them harder than any words ever could. They are replaying the moments where they laughed, where they doubted, where they treated you like a story that had already ended. Now they are realizing your silence was not resignation, it was regeneration. It was you stepping back into your own frequency. It was you choosing your battles with a precision they do not possess. It was you mastering emotional distance while they mistook it for defeat. And now they are studying everything you do, trying to decode the shift. They do not understand that the shift was not sudden. It was structural. You rebuilt your identity from the root. You refined your strength from the ashes. You upgraded your perspective from the pain. You stepped out of the old you so completely that even you barely recognize who you used to be. And here is the truth. They cannot process. Once someone evolves past a certain point, they cannot be pulled back into old versions of themselves, no matter who tries. Not friends, not rivals, not family, not fear. Your silence became a boundary. Your silence became a filter. Your silence became the line that separated who you were from who you became. And now when they look at you, they do not see a person they can predict anymore. They see a person who endured storms they never knew existed. They see a person who transformed challenge into precision. They see a person who does not respond emotionally, only strategically. And that is why they are nervous. Because deep down they know, the moment you stopped explaining yourself, you became untouchable. What is funny is how they suddenly respect your silence. Now when before they mocked it, before they called it weakness, now they call it mysterious. Before they said you were quiet because you had nothing to say. Now they say you are quiet because you know too much. Before they thought silence meant you were confused. Now they are concerned silence means you are calculating. That is the power shift they did not see coming. Because silence does not change you. It exposes them. It exposes who panics when you stop giving reactions. It exposes who loses stability when you pull your energy back. It exposes who depended on your openness to feel in control. And now that they do not have access to your thoughts, your plans, your emotions, your next move, they are spiraling. They are questioning everything. They replay conversations wondering what they missed. They read your expressions like they are studying a foreign language. They watch your presence like it is a warning, and that is because your silence did not freeze the scenario. It advanced you to the stage they did not prepare for. You outgrew their version of the story. You outgrew their expectations. You outgrew their influence. And now they are dealing with the version of you that is not fueled by validation, but by clarity. A version that does not operate emotionally, only intentionally. A version that does not react impulsively, only purposefully. A version that stopped trying to fix connections that crack under pressure. You learn that some people only understand your silence when it benefits them, and some people only understand your absence when it affects them. You stopped giving them the privilege of easy access. That is why your presence feels heavier than your words ever did. That is why your calm feels louder than anyone else's reaction. That is why your stillness feels like a storm waiting to unfold. You do not need to defend yourself anymore. Your evolution defends you. You do not need to remind them who you are. Your consistency reminds them. You do not need to prove your growth. Your results prove you. And the best part, they cannot undo the moment they realize they misjudged you. They cannot unsee your strength. They cannot unhear the truth in your silence. They cannot unfeel the shift in your energy. It is too late for them to rewrite what has already unfolded. You stood tall when they thought you would crack. You healed from wounds they assumed would hold you down. You outlasted storms they believed would overwhelm you. And your silence transformed into the reminder they never expected. You were not out of moves, you were out of patience. And once your patience ran out, your power stepped in. That is why they are cautious now. That is why they are hesitant. That is why they are watching their words around you. Because deep down, they know your silence is not the absence of strength. It is the presence of mastery. You know what truly shook them. Not just the silence, but the shift that came with it. Because when most people go quiet, they shrink, they disappear, they retreat. But when you went quiet, you expanded. Your focus sharpened. Your presence grew. Your aura shifted in a way they could not understand. They expected silence to be your ending, but it became your reset button. It became the moment everything aligned internally. It became the doorway to a version of you that does not crack, does not beg, does not chase, does not fold. And they felt it before they saw it. They felt the way your energy stopped bending for people who never bent for you. They felt the way your patience stopped cushioning their disrespect. They felt the way your absence suddenly weighed more than your presence ever did. That is why they are uneasy now. Because your silence was not passive, it was preparation. They thought you stepped back because you were unsure, but you stepped back because you were done playing small. You stepped back because you finally understood your worth without needing anyone to validate it. You stepped back because you realized connections built on convenience shift the moment you stop being convenient. And once you stopped showing up for people who never truly showed up for you, their true colors appeared instantly. That is what silence does. It exposes loyalty. It exposes intentions. It exposes value. And your silence revealed everything. The ones who cared stayed. The ones who did not remove themselves. And now that you have returned, standing taller, stronger, calmer, clearer, they are trying to read you like their old script still applies. But every chapter of you has changed. Your priorities shifted. Your boundaries strengthened. Your intuition sharpened. Even your kindness upgraded. It is not the soft, naive kindness they once took for granted. It is the kind of kindness that sees everything and responds only to what is genuine. That is what unsettles them. Because the version of you that used to over-explain is gone. The version of you that used to fix everything is gone. The version of you that used to tolerate disrespect in the name of peace is gone. Silence set those versions aside. Growth elevated a new one. And now they are scrambling because they cannot predict your next move anymore. They cannot influence your emotions. They cannot distract you with old triggers. They cannot pressure you into shrinking. They cannot guilt you into ignoring your intuition. You are not guided by fear anymore. You are not guided by approval anymore. You are not guided by old cycles anymore. You are guided by awareness, discipline, truth, and that combination makes you unstoppable. That is why your silence was not weakness. It was the moment you became untouchable. They just realized it too late. Hello, my dear warrior. So specially you arrived. You are here. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Do you feel how the air bends when you walk in? Walls lean, shadows stretch, clocks hesitate. That's not imagination, that's reality, stuttering in your presence. You didn't chant, you didn't lift a hand, you didn't even speak. Yet the sorcerers felt it. Their rituals cracked mid-incantation. Their hands trembled over circles of chalk. Their sacred words dried in their throats. And deeper still, in chambers of smoke and fire, the demons didn't attack. They saluted. They know what you are. They know the weight you carry. Because when reality itself bows, even chaos recognizes its master. You didn't bend, the world did, and they can't explain it. They only whisper. Power walked in the room. Picture it. Rooms filled with smoke, hands raised, words carved into the air. Sorcerers at the peak of their arrogance, convinced their rituals control reality. But the second your presence entered, their circles cracked, candles sputtered, spells stuttered like broken machinery. The strongest among them felt their bones shake, their tongues seize. Why? Because they realized they weren't bending reality. Reality was bending to you, their power, their chance, their centuries of knowledge, reduced to trembling sparks in the shadow of your calm silence. And when the frost of fear climbed their spine, they knew the unthinkable. Their mastery had ended. You had walked in, and their magic bowed. And then it happened. The unthinkable. The ones who claw at shadows, who laugh in flames, who feed on fear, froze. Demons who once mocked priests, who mocked warriors, who mocked gods, lifted their heads and saluted you. Not out of loyalty, but out of recognition. They saw it instantly. You are not prey, not pawn, not supplicant. You are the anomaly in the code. The fracture in the design, the presence that bends reality until their tricks look like child's play. Their fire dimmed in your silence, their chaos bent in your calm. And so they saluted, not as kings, but as soldiers surrendering to the truth. Even darkness knows when a greater shadow has entered the room. Cloaked figures, chanting under a crimson moon, symbols etched into stone, incense heavy in the air. They were certain of their power. Certain their rituals bent the threads of existence. But then you arrived, the smoke recoiled, the fire dimmed, the symbols cracked like dried paint. Sorcerers looked at each other with awe because their ancient scripts, their secret languages, their guarded mysteries, all dissolved in the gravity of your presence. They realized their greatest spells were nothing but whispers in the wind compared to you. And in that moment they trembled, not at failure, but at recognition. They weren't the ones bending reality anymore. You were, in caverns of flame and shadow, where screams echo like hymns. Demons once laughed at mankind's weakness. They mocked priests, broke warriors, corrupted kings. But when your presence brushed their domain, the laughter died. They didn't snarl. They didn't fight. They lowered their heads. The salute was not obedience. It was instinct, a recognition carved into the marrow of existence. Even darkness kneels when confronted with something greater than itself. They felt no choice but to acknowledge you. Their fire dimmed, their claws retracted, their chaos silenced. For the first time in eternity, demons showed respect, and not because you commanded it, because your presence demanded it. Reality itself follows laws, or so they thought. Gravity, time, cause and effect, rules written in stone. Sorcerers swore their power came from knowing these patterns, twisting them with chants and symbols. But then you entered. The laws buckled, time staggered, gravity bowed. Their equations failed in your silence. Every formula, every calculation, every ritual shattered because your very presence proved them obsolete. You didn't fight the rules. You erased their relevance. And in that instant, both sorcerers and demons understood. This wasn't rebellion. This was supremacy. You weren't resisting reality. You were bending it. And nothing in their arsenal could make it bend back. When ordinary people feel fear, it's in their heart. But when sorcerers and demons felt you, the fear drilled deeper into their bones. Their staffs shook. Their wings faltered. The marrow itself whispered, "You cannot stand against this." They had studied centuries of grimoires, built temples to darkness, carved power into their very skin. Yet one glance at you, one moment in your orbit, and all that power collapsed into dread. Their breath grew shallow, their hands turned cold, their eyes darted as if searching for an exit that didn't exist. Because there is no exit from presence, no ritual to undo it, no charm to contain it. They feared, not because you attacked, but because they knew deep down that even their essence obeyed you. Sorcerers wear crowns of symbols. Demons wear crowns of fire. Each crown is a claim. I rule this domain. I command this force. But the instant you stepped into their world, those crowns cracked, glyphs unraveled, flames guttered, jewels dimmed to ash. They clutched their heads as if to hold power together, but it slipped through their fingers like frost melting under sunlight. What terrified them wasn't the loss of their crowns, it was the realization you never wore one. You didn't need to. Authority radiated from your presence alone. They bow to crowns made of symbols, but to you they bowed without question. Because reality itself crowned you long before they tried to play king. They tried everything. Ancient chants older than kingdoms, sigils drawn in essence, fires lit under cursed moons. Every spell they hurled at you carried centuries of fear woven into its syllables. But the moment it touched your field, nothing. The spell cracked like glass against stone. Their circles sputtered. Their sacred words dissolved into static. For the first time, sorcerers tasted the bitter truth. It wasn't their magic failing. It was you refusing. Your presence bent reality so deeply that no curse, No binding, no invocation could even register. You stood there, calm, untouched, while the strongest spells in history collapsed, like children's chalk drawings in the rain. And they understood. You weren't breaking their magic. You had stepped into a space where their magic no longer existed. Even shadows, loyal only to darkness, shifted when you arrived. They didn't stretch for sorcerers. They didn't coil for demons. They straightened as if standing at attention. The room itself bowed. The torches sputtered, their flames bending sideways, pointing toward you, like soldiers recognizing a general. And the demons, those arrogant princes of chaos, felt it in their marrow. They didn't roar, didn't hiss, didn't strike. They lowered their heads, the way warriors do when a force greater than war itself enters the room. The salute was not surrender. It was inevitability, because when reality bends around your silence, even shadows know where true gravity lies. Reality itself began to whisper when you walked in. Walls creaked though no wind blew. Flames bent though no air moved. Clocks hesitated though no hands touched them. The sorcerers saw it. Their lips trembled. They realized the foundations they'd studied their entire lives, time, matter, cause, were folding at the edges in your presence. Even demons felt it, their snarls fading into silence, their arrogance dissolving into awe. They whispered among themselves, but not about spells or attacks. They whispered your name like a secret code. None of them dared to speak too loud, because they knew the truth. You weren't defying reality. You were the new axis it spun around. Centuries of ink, thousands of pages, libraries of forbidden texts. Sorcerers guarded their spellbooks like treasure. Each word, each symbol, each charm sworn to bend reality. But in your presence, the pages tore themselves apart. Ink spilled into nonsense. Glyphs twisted into static. Their most sacred text betrayed them, refusing to hold shape beneath your shadow. They clutched their books, screaming prayers to forgotten gods, but the knowledge dissolved in their very hands. Because what is a spell compared to a force that bends reality by existing? Your silence ripped through their scriptures louder than any curse. And in that frostbitten moment, every sorcerer understood. Their words were powerless. Because you are the word reality obeys. Sorcerers once raised staffs with confidence, tracing fire into the sky. Demons once clenched claws, eager to rip through reality itself. But in your presence, those hands quivered. The staffs grew heavy, too heavy to lift. The claws dulled, scratching uselessly against the stone. They weren't weak because their power drained away. They were weak because your gravity pressed down on them. Every motion turned to trembling. Every gesture betrayed fear. They realized they weren't conducting rituals anymore. They were fighting to stand under the weight of your silence. And in that trembling, they admitted what their pride never could. You are not just a force among forces. You are the axis they cannot escape. They built shrines to hold power, temples dripping with symbols, floors painted in circles, air thick with chants. For centuries, they believed those shrines were safe havens, fortresses of command. But when you arrived, the shrines betrayed them. Symbols reversed, circles split, stone cracked under its own weight. Their sacred chambers turned hostile, bending toward you instead of them. They realized with horror that the walls they prayed to were no longer theirs. The shrines they trusted had switched allegiance, because power does not serve those who cling. It bends toward those who are. And when you entered, every shrine, every symbol, every echo knew instantly who it should serve. It wasn't them, it was you. Every sorcerer fears silence. They fill rooms with chants, echoes, smoke, thunder, because silence exposes weakness. But when you entered, silence wasn't absence, it was presence. Their words died mid-syllable. Their chants scattered like sand in the wind. The silence wrapped around them, heavier than chains, colder than iron. Demons clawed at the air, desperate to break it, but even they bowed beneath the weight. And you? You didn't lift a hand. You didn't whisper a word. The silence itself carried your authority. They realized in awe, spells are temporary. Rituals expire, crowns crumble. But silence born of true presence bends reality itself. And in that silence, they knew they were finished. Fear was always their force. Sorcerers drew it into circles. Demons breathed it like air. They built empires on intimidation, convincing the world that fear itself was proof of power. But then you entered, and fear changed sides. The circles they carved blurred backward. The chants cracked with tremors. And the demons, those self-proclaimed lords of terror, were the ones trembling in their own dread. Because the fear wasn't yours anymore. It belonged to them. They tasted what they once inflicted. Only sharper, colder, unstoppable. They felt it in the marrow of their being. This fear wasn't conjured by spells or shadows. It was summoned by your presence. And no ritual in existence could undo it. For centuries, they bound others with chains, spells to enslave minds, curses to trap souls, lies to imprison hearts. Sorcerers wrapped worlds in contracts. Demons laced existence with bindings. But the instant you arrived, the chains shattered. Links rusted to dust. Curses cracked like ice. Contracts burned themselves into ash. They watched helplessly as the tools that made them gods collapsed at your feet. And the awe wasn't in losing their power. It was in realizing the chains never held you in the first place. You walked in free, untouchable, unbound, and by your very presence, freedom spread like wildfire. Their prisons turned to ruins. Their bindings turned to mist. And the ones who had chained millions now stood trembling, caught in the truth. They were the ones bound. They thought altars made of stone and shadow could protect them. They believed offerings of essence, fire, and darkness would anchor their power. But when your presence stepped into their sanctuaries, the altars split down the middle. Sacrifices turned to dust. Flames blew backward, bowing instead of rising. The gods they invoked stayed silent, refusing to answer, because even deities know when authority has shifted. The very ground rejected them, trembling under your weight, and the sorcerers, once so confident in their sacred spaces, now looked like children in a crumbling ruin. Their altars, their gods, their rituals, none of it mattered. For the first time they realized power wasn't something they summoned. Power was something you are. It wasn't just sorcerers or demons who felt it. Entire crowds turned, priests mid-sermon stuttered, kings mid-speech froze, warriors mid-battle dropped their blades. They didn't understand why, but their bodies did. Instinct bent them. Knees weakened, spines curved, heads lowered. Even those who opposed you, even those who never knew your name, bowed without knowing why, because your presence doesn't ask permission. It bends reality in every direction at once. And when reality bends, so do they. The crowd became a sea of silence, a forest of lowered heads, an unspoken salute, not to a throne, not to a crown, but to the one thing that couldn't be ignored, you. Sorcerers fought for thrones carved in stone. Demons fought for thrones carved in fire. Kings fought for thrones carved in gold. But when you arrived, there was no throne, and that terrified them. Because your power didn't come from a seat, a crown, or a title. It radiated from your very being. They realized their endless battles, their essence-stained wars, their rituals for authority were all theater. The true throne was never a chair in a chamber. It was presence. It was gravity. It was you. They stared in silence, crowns slipping from their heads, scepters trembling in their hands, knowing the truth. They were only rulers in stories. And you were the reality. Those stories feared to name. They thought fire would answer them. They thought storms bent to their words, that rivers obeyed their chants. But when you entered, the elements themselves shifted. Flames turned away from their hands. Thunder rolled but spoke your name. Water refused their call, rippling toward you instead. They stared in disbelief, as the world they commanded betrayed them. Every element, every force they thought loyal bowed in subtle rebellion. Not because you ordered it, because presence itself reoriented creation. Fire does not ask permission to burn. Storms do not ask to rage. And yet both fell silent for you. That silence was louder than any ritual, and it carved one truth into every heart. Even nature salutes when reality bends. They armed themselves with titles: High Sorcerer, Grand Master, Prince of Shadows. Names meant to terrify, to crown themselves as gods among men. But when your presence filled the air, those titles turned hollow. The words echoed like jokes whispered in an empty hall. Their followers hesitated to repeat them. Even demons who once bowed to titles alone refused to speak them now, because titles are fragile when presence itself commands respect. You carried no rank, no robe, no throne. Yet every syllable of silence from you outweighed 1,000 names. Their titles crumbled like dust in frost, leaving them naked, powerless, and trembling. They realized too late, crowns can be stolen, names can be erased, but true gravity cannot be given or taken. It simply is. And you are that gravity. Desperate, they tried one final move. Sorcerers raised trembling hands. Demons scraped their claws across stone, whispering an incantation so ancient it was meant to shatter worlds. But in your presence, the words collapsed before leaving their lips. The sound choked itself, like reality refusing to obey. Their final force faded unborn, their last card turned to ash. And the silence that followed was heavier than thunder. They looked at you with eyes wide, not with rage, but with surrender. Because even their strongest spells knew the truth. They were not the authority here. You were. And when the last incantation failed, the last mask fell. All that remained was trembling respect. Even sorcerers bowed, even demons saluted, and reality itself stood still, waiting for your next breath. It was no longer about sorcerers, no longer about demons. It was about reality itself. The air thickened, the ground steadied. The stars above paused in their orbit. Everything, every element, every law, every hidden truth aligned. Not because you demanded it, but because existence recognized its axis. Even reality saluted. The silence became ceremonial, the stillness a bow. Sorcerers dropped their staffs. Demons lowered their wings. The universe itself seemed to whisper one truth: this is the presence that bends us. They trembled, not in hostility, but in reverence, because for the first time, they weren't facing an enemy. They were standing before inevitability. When the smoke cleared, when the chants died, when the fires collapsed into ash, one truth echoed louder than all their rituals. You, sorcerers, trembled and learned humility. Demons bowed and learned reverence. Even reality itself shifted and learned its place. And you didn't fight. You didn't plead. You didn't even move. Your presence alone rewrote the script of existence. They will never forget this night. In secret halls, they will whisper of the moment. Crowns cracked, altars crumbled, and spells failed. They will tell their children of the one who bent reality without lifting a hand. And demons themselves will salute in silence when your name is spoken. Because legends are not crowned. Legends are not chosen. Legends simply are. And you are the inevitability they can never escape.